Both Kansas and Iowa State came into Big Monday desperately needing a win, but the Cyclones offense once again failed to show up.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy Tuesday, and welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, Andy Patton, and you're joining at the place to get your college basketball content Monday through Saturday, 6 days a week now, with our new Locked On College Basketball Game Night show going live on Saturday evenings after all the action is done. Want to thank all of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Remind you all that you can listen to the show ad-free on Amazon Music, and that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Folks, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Well, Kansas got a much-needed win. Pitt lost almost all their hope of getting an at-large bid in the NCAA tournament. Plus, we take a look at Tuesday's slate of games, including a battle of the top-ranked Big East teams and some fun in the SEC and Big 12. Before we close the show with some thoughts on Leonard Hamilton, who announced he is retiring at the end of the season after a decorated career spent most recently at Florida State. We start the show with Big Monday here. 2 games on Big Monday, ACC, Big 12. We joked that the ACC game this week was not exactly the most exciting ACC or Big Monday matchup really that we've ever gotten between Virginia and Pitt. We'll get to that game. It did not go how many would have expected it to go, so we'll talk about that. But the nightcap did deliver. If you are a fan of Bill Self and the Jayhawks, that is the 16th ranked Kansas club picks up a 69-52 win over TJ Otzelberger and the 8th ranked Cyclones. Both teams are coming off losses. Kansas had lost two of their last 3 coming into this game. They'd lost that epic game to Houston where they had the 6-point lead with DeJuan Harris at the line with 18 seconds to go. They lost a 19-point halftime lead at Baylor. So against Baylor, they desperately needed a win here against Iowa State. Meanwhile, the Cyclones had lost 2 straight. They lost to Arizona also in overtime. That was the Caleb Love hitting that 55-footer on Big Monday last week. And then they lost at home to Kansas State, the largest margin of defeat by a top 5 AP team at home to an unranked team ever. So they were really needing to win as well. Unfortunately for the Cyclones, they were unable to get it. Now a 3-game losing streak for Iowa State. And Kansas pretty much put this thing away in the first half. They're up 35-19 at halftime. Late in the first half, DeJuan Harris steal, gets the ball out to Diggy Coit. Diggy Coit throws a half-court alley-oop to KJ Adams. It felt like that was it. There was still like a minute and a half left in the first half, but Fog Allen Fieldhouse was rocking. They had a huge lead, and Iowa State chipped away in the second half periodically, but never really got this thing that close. Again, it was a 35-19 at halftime. The final margin was basically exactly the same. Iowa State would get within 17, they'd get within 14, and then Kansas would build it back up to about 20. And it just was never really a game where Iowa State established any kind of momentum, any kind of run, anything of that nature. Their offense was just not there at all. It's been an issue for the Cyclones for a while, specifically in these last 3 games, but it's been a problem really since Milan Momcilovic went down with that injury. In this game, Iowa State shoots under 31% from the field. They shoot just 3 of 21 from 3. That's 14%. They were 11 of 20 from the free throw line. This team just did not find any way to put the basketball in the net throughout this game. Big credit to Kansas's defense. They had 9 blocked shots, 4 of them by Hunter Dickinson, 4 of them by backup Flory Bidunga. Just a really nice defensive effort from the Jayhawks, but again, a continued issue for this Iowa State club not being able to score the rock. Keyshawn Gilbert and Curtis Jones combined to shoot 8 of 27, 2 of 12 from 3 for those 2 guys. Joshua Jefferson had 11 points, but he was 3 of 13. Tamin Lipsey, 11 points, 5 of 13, including 1 of 6 from 3 again. Team that scored 75 points in an overtime game against Arizona. This team that scored just 61 points at home against Kansas State. Now scored just 52 in this game against Kansas. That offense is going in the wrong direction. Fortunately for the Cyclones, their next 4 games are at home against TCU, on the road against Central Florida, and then at home again against both Cincinnati and Colorado. Those are four of the worst teams in the Big 12. I think there's an argument for Utah and a few others at the bottom, but these are not some of the better performing teams in the conference. So hopefully for Iowa State fans, they can get this a little momentum here with a nice 4-game winning streak after losing 3 straight. Meanwhile, for Kansas, another great performance from Zeke Mayo. He had 17 points, 8 boards, 3 assists. He was 5 of 6 from the 3-point line in this one. Hunter Dickinson, 14 points and 9 boards. He also had 4 blocks, as we mentioned before. Kansas now 7-4 in conference play, tied with Iowa State. Next up for them, another not too bad stretch of ball for the Jayhawks. They're on the road at rival Kansas State in their next game. Then they host Colorado. Then they got a road trip through Utah, starting at Utah and then ending at the Marriott Center in Provo against the Cougars. Not saying that Utah road trip's going to be easy, because the road trips in Utah are tough, especially at the Marriott Center, but all told, a opportunity here for Kansas to build off of this win and carry some of that momentum potentially into a strong finish this year. Bill Self's team on the precipice of finishing outside the top 3 in the Big 12 for back-to-back years, as we talked about, has not happened for this team since the early 1980s. But a win here certainly gives them some momentum going forward, especially with how well this team played on the defensive end of the floor. Looking at the other game, the starter for this big Monday matchup here, Virginia and Pitt. Virginia absolutely throttled this really struggling Panthers team. The final score, 73-57. It didn't feel that close either, folks. This thing was a blowout from the beginning for this Cavaliers team. They were 15-4 lead at the under 12. Pitt scored 4 points in the first 8 minutes of this basketball game. The score was 24-7 at the under 8 media timeout. The score was 30-10 at the under 4, and it ended up being 34-19 at halftime. Again, Pitt played better in the second half, made up some of that, got a little bit closer, but still ultimately never really found themselves in this basketball game. Again, they were down 10 at the under 12 and never really fully recovered. Dai Dai Ames, phenomenal game from him for Virginia. 27 points on 11 of 16 shooting. That included being 3 of 6 from beyond the arc. Virginia as a team, 10 of 22. 45.5% from 3. This win gets them up to 4-8 in the ACC and just under 500 overall, 11-12. Meanwhile, Pitt falls to 14-8 overall and now just 5-6 in the ACC. Ish Leggett had a good game, 17 points, 7 of 11 shooting. Everybody else, awful offensive performances from the rest of this team. Combined, the team shot 9 of 32 outside of Ish Leggett. That is 28%. And folks, it has been a disaster for Pitt since that game against Duke in early January, when Cooper Flagg threw down that thunder dunk all over Jorge Guillermo Diaz-Graham. Excuse me, I think it was Guillermo that he dunked on. Since then, Pitt had a bad second half in that game against Duke. They're 2-6 in their last 8 games, including that loss to Duke. This Pitt team was on the path to be one of the ACC teams that gets an at-large bid. They were in the mix with Wake Forest. They are in the mix with Clemson, in the mix now with North Carolina. Louisville's a little bit safer at this point right now, but Pitt was in that conversation, and then they kind of kept racking up losses. They had a loss to Florida State. Now they have this loss to Virginia. None of their other losses in conference play are terrible, but Florida State and Virginia are bad losses, and there's not a lot of good wins that you can get in the ACC. So Pitt now finds themselves in a position where, I mean, this might have been it. This is the kind of win that is really hard to recover from, especially in a conference like this where you don't have a ton of great opportunities. Recording this late on Monday night, so we do not know what their updated net ranking will be, but they were 35th coming into this day. They're 1-6 in quad 1 games. They're now 5-2 in quad 2 games. That's assuming Virginia is a quad 2 game. They were right on the edge of being quad 2, quad 3. They're presumably moving up, but doesn't mean they won't move back down. Doesn't mean this won't eventually be a quad 3 loss for Pitt. That is very possible. In that case, it is probably a death sentence for them in terms of getting a at-large bid in the NCAA tournament. They do have some opportunities coming up. Their next 2 games at North Carolina, at SMU. Both of those are currently quad 1 opportunities for the Panthers. So maybe they can build some momentum, pick up a couple wins there, but things are not looking good right now for Pitt. Before we move on from Monday's action, we had a couple of game winners. There's actually a lot of excitement in the mid-major level on Monday night. Stephen F. Austin and Norfolk State both picked up epic game-winning wins. SFA, Stephen F. Austin had a win over New Orleans. They won on a 50-plus foot buzzer beater as the clock expired. It was incredibly epic. Huge win for them. Norfolk State, similar shot to win it as well. Fun to see those buzzer beaters. That's what makes college basketball so great. There's a lot of fun ones on Monday night. We're going to move on. We're going to talk about what's going on tonight on Tuesday. The top two teams in the Big East are battling it out. Plus, can Kentucky get back on track, taking on Chris Beard and Ole Miss? We're going to talk about that coming up in just a second. The first, folks, are you looking for tickets to your next big event, whether it's a concert, a comedy show, or a sporting event? Finding the right ticket at the right price can be a headache. But with Game Time Picks, it's never been easier. Let me tell you how it works. With Game Time Picks, the app does all the hard work for you. It curates the best deals so you don't have to waste time searching through endless ticket listings. I've been using Game Time Picks for a while now, and here's why I love it. Not only does it show you only the best deals, but the app has a view from your seat feature so you can see exactly what your view is going to look like on game day. And the best part, you're covered with Game Time's lowest price guarantee. If you find a better deal somewhere else, they'll refund 110% of the difference. Plus, your tickets are guaranteed to be delivered on time with easy cancellation options if something comes up. Are you ready to make your next event even better? Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, that's code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, segment 2 here. Still Andy Patton, still Locked On College Basketball Podcast. And we're moving away from recapping the epicness that was a lot of buzzer beaters and some fun on Big Monday to talk about what we got coming up here tonight on Tuesday. We got a lot of ranked matchups, 2 ranked on ranked matchups, one in the Big East, one in the SEC. And then we got, I think, six or seven other games going on with ranked teams. Tuesdays have really delivered this season, and today the 4th is no exception. We'll start in the Big East. The 11th ranked Marquette Golden Eagles going on the road to take on Rick Pitino and number 12 St. John's. What a matchup between the two teams that are in at the top of the Big East standings, I should say. St. John's actually has a 1-game lead right now over Marquette after Marquette fell to UConn over the weekend. This game is at 6:30 Eastern time on FS1 tonight. FanDuel favoring the Johnnies by 2.5 in this one. Lots of fun to look forward to in this game. Cam Jones, Kadari Richmond, that seems like the epic matchup. Richmond's been playing some great basketball lately for Pitino's team. He had that game winner against Providence over the weekend. Meanwhile, Cam Jones been fantastic for Marquette. This is going to be a fun matchup. I'm excited to see how the front court play as well. We've talked a lot about Marquette's rebounding. It hasn't been as big of an issue as we thought it was going to be based on just losing Oso Ighodaro and not having a ton of front court players who play around the rim on the roster. Zubi Ejiofor, one of the better big men in the conference. So I think it'll be interesting to see how Marquette handles him and what that does for the potential rebounding advantage in this game. But this should be a really, really high-level basketball game again on FS1 at 6:30 Eastern time. 3 ranked games going on in the SEC, including ranked on ranked, as number 14 Kentucky goes on the road to take on number 25 Ole Miss, 7 Eastern time on ESPN. FanDuel favoring the Rebels by 3.5. Both these teams have been struggling lately. Cats have lost 3 of their last 4. Ole Miss has lost 4 of their last 5. For Kentucky, they had that home loss to Arkansas. John Calipari came into town, got himself a W. The Cats are now down to just 4-4 in conference play. They've been having some injury issues. Kirk Reese has been out for a while. Lamont Butler out as well right now, so no point guard for this Kentucky team has really hampered Mark Pope's teams offensively. Meanwhile, Ole Miss, 4 of their last 5. Their only win was at home against Texas. That was a pretty close game for them. They're looking for a W. Hanging on to a spot in the top 25. Meanwhile, Kentucky obviously wants to rebound from that loss against Arkansas. There should be some fun basketball on Tuesday night. Other 2 games, Vanderbilt no longer in the top 25 after losing last week. They are going on the road looking to get back into the top 25. It's got a tough path because they're going to Gainesville to take on the 6th-ranked Florida Gators. 7 Eastern time for this one as well on the SEC network. FanDuel favoring the Gators by 12.5. They're looking to rebound as well after that 20-point loss to Tennessee, which Tennessee handed them after getting beat by 30 by that same Florida team earlier in the year. Latest update we're hearing is that Walter Clayton Jr. is expected to play for Florida after injuring his ankle against Tennessee. It sounds like it was just a sprain, and he is expected to play for Vanderbilt against Vanderbilt for Florida. That is obviously great news for the Gators and not so great news for the Commodores. Vandy is 3-1 at home. in the SEC this year, but they are just 1-3 on the road in the conference, this being a road game in Gainesville. Tough to see Vanderbilt finding a way to pull this one off. Mark Byington's done a great job with the Commodores this year, but that is a tough sell. We'll see how that one shakes out on Tuesday. And then Oklahoma, Porter Moser's club going on the road to take on the number 1 ranked Tigers of Auburn. 9 Eastern time for this one. Also on the SEC network, FanDuel favoring Auburn unsurprisingly by 16.5. Auburn, one of 2 remaining undefeated teams in conference play among the power conferences. Is that going to continue to be the case? Oklahoma, they're 3-5, but their wins are South Carolina, Arkansas, and Vanderbilt. Not exactly the most impressive 3 wins you can pick up in the SEC. Jeremiah Fears versus Tahad Pettiford, a battle of freshman guards, should be a really fun aspect of this game. 3 ranked games going on in the Big Ten as well. Purdue going on the road at Iowa. Boilermakers number 7 in the latest AP poll. This game is at 7 Eastern time on Peacock. FanDuel favoring the Boilers by 7.5. Purdue's 9-2 right now. They beat Oregon, they beat Michigan, they beat Indiana all fairly recently. They're only 1 game back from Michigan State. We'll talk about them in a second. A good opportunity for Purdue to pick up win number 10 in the conference and keep pace with Michigan State, who's going to have a much tougher time in their game. The 9th-ranked Spartans going on the road to take on UCLA, 10 Eastern time on Peacock. FanDuel favoring the Bruins here by 2.5 points. Tom Izzo's club went to USC and lost their first conference loss this season. Now they got a chance to rebound from that, pick up a win against the better of the LA Big Ten schools in UCLA. Of course, UCLA, they've been great as of late. 5-game winning streak for the Bruins. They beat Wisconsin and Oregon among those 5 Ws. Both teams top 20 defensive teams in the country, but Michigan State is a much better offense. However, they are the team on the road coming off of a loss. We've seen, Isaac talked about it on a recent episode, we've seen that these teams that are going on these long road trips with 2 games, they tend to do better in the second game than the first game. Certainly Michigan State fans will hope that is the case, but UCLA playing some good ball right now, so they might be able to hand Michigan State their second loss, which would be great for UCLA, and a 6-game winning streak wouldn't be too bad for Purdue either if they pick up that win at Iowa. Elsewhere in the Big Ten, you got Indiana on the road at number 21 Wisconsin, 9 Eastern time on Peacock. FanDuel favoring the Badgers by 9.5. Indiana is reeling right now, folks. 5 of their last 6 have been losses. Their only win was an overtime win against Ohio State. Season really circling the drain for Coach Mike Woodson and the Hoosiers. The Badgers, meanwhile, they're 7-4. They got some tough road losses, but they've played well as of late. John Tonji and Blackwell should be a really tough matchup for Indiana's guards. I think that's going to be the difference maker in a win here for Wisconsin. 2 ranked games going on in the Big 12. We got Oklahoma State going on the road to take on number 5 Houston at the Fertitta Center, 8 Eastern time. That game on ESPN+. FanDuel favoring the Cougs by 22.5. The question for Houston, can they respond from that tough loss at home on Saturday to Texas Tech? That was the game where JT Toppin got ejected early in the game, and Grant McCaslin got ejected for arguing the call with JT Toppin. Meanwhile, Texas Tech still managed to get a very marquee win at Houston. The Cougs looking to rebound from that. Oklahoma State has not beaten any of the good teams in the Big 12 this year. They really haven't. I don't see them putting up much of a fight here. I think this is going to be a pretty pissed off Houston team coming off that loss. I think they're going to rally the troops and they're going to get a W here. FanDuel obviously agrees with that 22.5 point line. I wouldn't be surprised considering what Houston can do to bad teams. The way that they have buried teams this year, I wouldn't be surprised to see them cover that spread either. Speaking of Texas Tech, they're at home. They're now up to 13 in the AP poll. Big climb for the Red Raiders. They're hosting Baylor, who obviously is coming off that massive comeback win over Kansas over the weekend. This game is at 9 Eastern time. It'll be on ESPN2. FanDuel favors the home team, the Red Raiders, by 7.5. The big matchup in the front court, JT Toppin versus Norchad Omier. A lot has been made about Baylor's lack of rebounding this season. Omier is a phenomenal rebounder. The rest of the team, not great rebounding. They've had some injuries at times. They just do not have a ton of front court depth on this roster. Meanwhile, Texas Tech is big. They're physical. Toppin has been a menace. He's a good shot blocker. He's a great rebounder. He's a good low post scorer. The battle between the two of them is going to be a big storyline in this game, especially if VJ Edgecombe does not play. At the time of this recording, there is no update on the status of freshman VJ Edgecombe. He went down with an injury in the second half against Kansas, so we do not know if he's going to play. No Edgecombe makes it even tougher for this kind of depleted Baylor team to find a way to win on the road against a very good and rolling Texas Tech club. This should be a very fun basketball game, arguably the most fun among the games that don't feature two ranked teams on this list. A lot of the other games are not expected to be super close games. The line here is fairly big, but especially if Edgecombe does play, I think Baylor's got a chance to make this thing real interesting. But it's going to be a fun one to play out at the Fertitta Center in Houston tonight. Speaking of fun Big 12 games, this one's not a ranked game, but Arizona at BYU. It highlights the best of the rest from Tuesday. We're going to talk about a few of those games, plus another ACC coach calling it quits. But hey, at least Leonard Hamilton is waiting until the end of the season. We'll get to that in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still locked on college basketball, and we are closing out the show with a few more previews for tonight's games on Tuesday. Then we're going to talk a little Leonard Hamilton after he announces his retirement at the end of the season from Florida State. First up for our 3 more games, one in the Big East, one in the ACC, one in the Big 12. We'll start in the Big East. Georgetown going on the road at Xavier, 8:30 Eastern time. This game will be on FS1, FanDuel favoring Xavier by 7.5. Last 4 for Xavier. They have wins over Marquette and UConn. Both those were at home. They have losses on the road to St. John's and Creighton. 4 last games for Xavier have been against the 4 best teams in the conference, convincingly the 4 best teams in the conference. They won the 2 home games. They lost to 2 on the road. The loss to St. John's was in overtime. This team's been playing some good ball. The record doesn't really reflect it. They've lost enough bad games that it kind of keeps them down more than they should be, but this is a good basketball team, and they got a chance to right the ship here against the Georgetown team that's 2-6 in their last 8 games under Ed Cooley. Their only wins were Nova and Butler. They haven't been able lately to pick up any of the marquee wins. They did a little earlier in conference play. They haven't done it as much lately. This is a good chance for them to go get a nice road win over the Musketeers, but certainly Xavier the favorite team here, and for good reason. ACC, Georgia Tech going on the road at Clemson, 9 Eastern time on the ACC Network. FanDuel favoring the Tigers here by 13.5. We bring it up because Georgia Tech just stunned Louisville in a game earlier over the weekend. This is kind of the Damon Stoudemire thing. He did this last year. For those of you who don't remember, they didn't win very many Quad 1 games last year. They didn't win very many ACC games last year under Coach Stoudemire, but they won quite a few Quad 1A games, like the top 15 in the net wins. They got wins over Duke. They wins over North Carolina. Like, Georgia Tech plays up at a super high level, and they got this nice win over Louisville when they have lost a lot of crappy games to bad teams this year. We will see if they can do it again on the road against Clemson. Tough ask for Georgia Tech. They got the talent. They have some really, really good players on that roster. But for Clemson, this is an experienced team under Brad Brownell, who is now the most experienced coach in the ACC following Hamilton's departure. Brownell, Ian Shefflin obviously has been great. I think that this team is still disciplined enough, veteran enough, talented enough to win against Georgia Tech. But hey, I wouldn't have expected the Yellow Jackets to beat Duke last year, and they did it. So that's why we highlight that game here. And then the Big 12, we teased it, Arizona at BYU. This is going to be a really fun basketball game, folks. 11 Eastern time, ESPN. FanDuel favoring BYU by 1.5. Both these teams, high-level offenses, run up and down the floor. You got kind of an NBA-style offense, which Coach Kevin Young, coming over from the Phoenix Suns. Tommy Lloyd has always run that up-tempo, Mark Few style, high-efficiency offense, getting up and down the floor. This should be a really good basketball game. It's going to be at the Marriott Center. That place is always popping in Provo. These two teams, again, similar-ish styles. Going to be fun to see Igor Demin go up against Caleb Love. Going to be fun to see, Kenan Catchings and Carter Bryant. It's a great game for NBA draft scouts, people who want to watch kind of for that reason, with Demin and Catchings and Carter Bryant and a handful of others in this contest. This should be fun. I'm excited about this one. This is probably my favorite game of the day, outside of maybe Marquette St. John's. Those two are pretty good basketball games, but I obviously Arizona right now, 9-1 in conference play. Their only loss to Texas Tech. This is a team that's rolling right now. BYU does not have that great of a record in conference play, but they are a very tough team to beat on the road. We'll see if Tommy Lloyd and Arizona, coming off that win over Arizona State, if they can keep the momentum going and go win a road one here in Provo. Finishing up the show here, we'll have more conversation about this, I'm sure, in future episodes, but we wanted to at least mention it as the news of the day in college basketball. Leonard Hamilton, and it's news, obviously, it's big news, but it's not unsurprising news. Leonard Hamilton announced he is intending to retire at the end of the college basketball season. from Florida State. He's been there for a very long time. He's 76 years old. He's the winningest coach in Florida State basketball history. He is a top 5 winner in ACC basketball history as well. The ACC continues to go through a massive shift amongst coaches. You obviously, a few years ago, you lost Coach K, you've lost Roy Williams, you lost Jim Boeheim. Now in the much more recent past, as in the last 4 months, you see Tony Bennett make a surprise announcement that he's retiring just before the season. You see Coach L, Jim Larrañaga at Miami, retire in the middle of the season. And then, of course, now you have Leonard Hamilton. We had Mike Bray as well from Notre Dame, but you have Leonard Hamilton announcing he's going to retire at the end of the season. First of all, shouts to Leonard Hamilton for making the announcement, preparing everybody, preparing recruits, preparing players, preparing the fan base, the donors, etc., but not just stepping away suddenly. We were critical of Tony Bennett for doing that before the season. We were critical of him timing it in a way that he was hoping would kind of trap the players in that situation and kind of force the team to hand the team over to Ron Sanchez. Hasn't gone very well. Shout out to Virginia, by the way, for getting a W today, but it hasn't really been the plan. The plan hasn't gone very well. We criticized Coach L, Larrañaga, for retiring in the middle of the season. Larrañaga said, I can't. He was upset about the new era of college basketball and players wanting to leave for more money. And sure, if this isn't what you signed up for, I can understand that. I really can. It's not what these coaches signed up for. But to criticize players for leaving on the team when you're quitting in the middle of the season is tone deaf at best. Let's put it that way. So for Leonard Hamilton, who we'll get to, he's not a saint with regards to how he's handled NIL, and we're going to get to that in a second. But the optics around this feel better because he's saying, hey, I'm going to be done at the end of the year. I'm going to continue to coach. I want to help with the process of finding my replacement. I want to help the administration, etc., do right by this program that he's been at for a really long time, where he is the winningest coach in the program's history. Now, we kind of are happy to praise Coach Hamilton, but we would be remiss to not acknowledge that he is currently being sued by 6 former players. I don't have the full list. I know Cameron Fletcher's on there. I know that Jalen Warley is on there. There's a handful of others who are on there as well, who are on the 23-24 team, last year's roster, are suing him because they are saying he did not pay $250,000 each in payments for NIL. And in fact, they actually had planned a staged walkout of a practice and intended to not play in a game against Duke last season. Ultimately were convinced by Coach Hamilton to play in that game against Duke with the understanding that they would get paid their money. They have still not been paid their money. That is why they are filing a lawsuit. None of them are currently with Florida State. So that is obviously a situation that we will continue to monitor and discuss as it relates to this new NIL space in college basketball. Certainly more details to that story that are known at this point and that will be known in the future, but it's obviously one of many stories we've heard on kind of this downside, this black mark about not NIL specifically as much as unregulated NIL, which is obviously a significant problem in college basketball right now. And unfortunately, this will be a bit of a stain for Coach Hamilton, depending on how it all shakes out, obviously, but not exactly what you want to be one of the most prominent news stories of your final season as one of the most prolific head coaches in Florida State and ACC basketball history. As I mentioned before, Brad Brownell, now the longest tenured coach in the ACC. Florida State hosting Notre Dame tonight. We'll see how they look in that game, but there's a larger conversation to be had. And in fact, we did have it after Tony Bennett stepped away, and we had it to an extent after Coach Larrañaga stepped away, but the identity of the ACC as a basketball conference continues to erode with coaches like Bennett and L and Hamilton and, of course, K and Roy Williams and Mike Bray and Boeheim. Like, the incredible amount of coaching talent that has departed this conference in the very recent past, in the last half decade, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable the amount of talent that was housed in this conference. And now you just watch it all go away and you're replaced by younger talent, in many cases, younger, inspiring talent like Pat Kelsey, potentially Damon Stoudemire. I don't want to throw him in that same conversation quite yet, although I like what we've seen. But John Shire, obviously a very notable one. But it'll be interesting to see how some of these legacy programs, how some of these iconic basketball programs, I mean, Miami's going to be hiring a new coach this offseason. Florida State obviously is going to be. We expect that Virginia will be. It'll be interesting to see how many of these programs can hit right on this coach and potentially help rebuild the value of the ACC in an era where conference affiliation, especially from a financial perspective, is so critical to the success of your team and your conference's teams around you in the NIL era. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making the show your first listener, your first watch of the day. Enjoy the games today. Lots of fantastic action on Tuesday. Leaf and Isaac will be back with you live Wednesday morning to recap all the action and get you ready for Wednesday's games as well. And of course, check out Locked On College Basketball Game Night on Saturday night as Leaf hosts that show live in the evening, recapping all of the Saturday night action. Thanks again, folks. Have a fantastic rest of your day. As always, we want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wild Popes. And until Wednesday morning, peace out.